Dr. Tekola. I love saying that. When I first met you, you weren't Dr. Tekola yet. And so that's a tremendous accomplishment. And again, you've been on the show to talk to us about social justice activism, these sorts of things. But we're now introducing a side of you to the world that is very special. And this is something that has always been near and dear to your heart as long as I've known you. So let's talk about your educational background and why you chose to study to become a sustainability scientist now. That's so impressive. So give us that background.
Yeah. So, I've always had a passion for the environment, a passion for wildlife, and getting into the field as an undergraduate, as an environmental scientist. Initially, I was actually in wildlife biology, and I kept finding that this kind of roadblock, like climate change, is going to kill all animals. So it doesn't matter how many trees I plant. It doesn't matter how much like restoration that we do. It's like if climate change is still here, like that's the problem. Yeah. And as I learned more and as I grew in my analysis, I realized my father is actually a refugee from Ethiopia, and the way he said he left when there was like they took out the king, like kind of stuff hit the fan, and he's like, I fled from war. But when I started learning more, what really caused the political instability at the root of it was the drought, a drought caused by climate change. And so even himself, I consider a climate refugee. Okay. And so I started realizing that this is so much more than like, we always talk about climate change. That was going to affect the polar bears, but it's affecting people. It's affecting the most vulnerable people. It's the defining issue of our time. And especially as we think about going forward, we are going to hit 2030 is one of those milestones that if we don't make certain behaviors before then, if we don't change our fuel systems before then, it really changes our future and the livability of our future. And so as an undergraduate, as an environmental scientist, I found myself doing all this research and doing this studies around like, okay, when is the last starfish going to die? When is the last rhino going to die? And I was like, this is depressing. I want to do something. I've always been an activist. And so looking at like, what can we do about it? And I was told actually when I was interning for NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and was able to see the zooplankton starting to dissolve, and they make up the bottom of the food chain. Yeah. And I'm like, we're the federal government. We have to do something. Yeah. And they're like, that's not our job as scientists. We're going to write another report. And I was like, oh, I'm in the wrong field then. So I got into politics. I started doing activism around the climate. And really what switched me to sustainability is that sustainability as a science is really more solution oriented. It's like, what do we do about it? We're not just going to report how bad the problem is. We're going to do something about it. And that's always been my mission, to take the science to the sidewalks. For too long, communities of color have felt like, oh, this is a white people thing. But not only are we dying at the highest rates, but also like we deserve to be at the table, because when our communities come forward, we come with innovative solutions. And so that's why I went into sustainability science, because I want to be a part of the change and I want to be solution oriented to the climate crisis.
Sure. Now, for a lot of folks, before we get to like the most vulnerable people, because obviously, environmental racism as a term exists for a reason. But before we get there, in recent, even weeks, but certainly recent months and years, we've seen a lot of very intense things happen around the planet. Mm-hmm. I want you to speak to our listeners a bit about any connection that there may be between some of the more recent goings on and this climate change issue. Yeah. And we'll then I have a follow-up question after we're done. So we'll start there.
So July was the hottest month on Earth's record.
Right.
We've never experienced that before, and that's directly caused by humans. It's directly caused climate change. It's because of the fossil fuels that we put in the atmosphere that's causing this now. Okay. The Maui's fire. it's again was not only caused by climate change but also colonialism, because once the colonizers took over Hawaii, colonizers being the United States, they changed the management, and so the indigenous people of Hawaii had a different management technique that was protecting the island. Once they started creating monocrops, they started removing the water from the areas that made it more vulnerable. Then you add climate change. That's why Maui burned down.
I read about that. Yeah.
Then you look at a lot of the things like the Hurricane Hillary that just hit. That was the first hurricane that hit in over 80 years in California. That again was caused by climate change. So the wildfires that are affecting really the whole world, but more specifically, we know in Canada, they had caused smoke in New York. We're seeing it in Seattle as well. We're seeing it in California. These wildfires, again, caused by climate change, made worse by Western or colonial management techniques.